Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Futures After 5, and we are taking a look at the markets in general and comparing it to what we thought about this morning. If you saw the morning report, you know that I talked about bounce action that I expected to rise up into these higher levels and then fade. They didn't quite get there, but we did get that fade. And I also said ultimately at the base of that fade, we would begin a bounce. So we really have lifted about 16 points off of that low and are holding there. Let's discard that. Holding there in this pattern. So what do we expect to see from our broad formations? Well, one is that this bounce action press has got to get up over 2640. It's going to try and battle at that zone, but right now there is a lot of negative pressure sitting there. So I suspect that my bounces are going to have fade actions associated with them in the ES. Overall, we had a really good score in terms of saying, all right, did we take our breakdown from the traders? And these are the levels that we had here. Here's our trader breakdown in these zones. We'll be looking at this 26.48 and 67.19 for the time being, but that is what we looked at this morning, and those did very, very nicely in the fade, coming really deeply into support and breaking past our targets, but also recovering right near the edge of our last target, which was this 26, 36.50 area. So tonight, what do we expect? Well, we've gotten our first pass bounce. And so we're seeing a support edge, but we also have a resistance edge showing here right now. And so if we take a look at that resistance edge, we can see that clearly the bounces into that area are going to give us a problem. A 30-minute chart would be too small. um, but an hourly chart would tell us, hey, if we can hold this area, it'll be baseline support. So I expect us overnight to be trapped in this area some way to bounce into resistance and then fade. Overall, this bounce up that we had into the 2670-ish area is the resistance zone that I expect us to carry through on, and that ought to carry through in general back down into the deeper edges of support, which could end us up in essentially a very sideways patch for a time. We'll just have to see how it goes. For right now, we know that what we're doing is battling between a frontline support zone that we can see here, 2624, and frontline resistance, which is really now sitting at essentially about 2676. Let's take a look at the NQ. Same sort of thing. We said, hey, listen, we're going to bounce into resistance. We had a resistance region show up. We held the support, bounced, and then failed to breach up and over our old resistance that became support that lost as resistance. And what did we do? Stepped right down into these levels. I haven't changed these levels at all. So you can look at this morning's review and see that what we did was come into the old areas of resistance. Did we fly through them? Yes. So what does that mean? You don't put a limit order to go long when you see a chart moving down like this. Even if you anticipate a bounce, you need to wait for that formation to do what it's supposed to. Overnight, we're going to see bounces. They're likely to be weak. Let's take a look at the daily chart and see what kind of mechanic we are looking at. We still have frontline support action sitting right around these areas. And that frontline support likely to fade on the bounce. This one's quite a bit weaker. It is quite a bit weaker. Doesn't mean that it won't bounce. You see the thin volume profile here coming into the edge of the next serious area of frontline support. And then this thin volume action here, we could easily bounce into these ranges of congestion. So what do? You look for the edges to get involved in the other direction. Is it exhausting to trade like that? Yes, but if you pay attention to those edges, you'll do fairly well. If you can't look at the chart, just realize that what you're going to have is expanded risk. So anticipate the deepest dip for a pullback event and you'll be in fairly good shape. The big job here as a trader is not to be involved. That's great for us if all we are looking at is trading in a very bullish market. You just want to be involved. If it's a very bearish market, you want to be involved. But this is no trend, and it's moving up, down, and sideways, and we are essentially in a very wide range with the NQ. We could have lots of motion overnight. What do we expect? The bounce action has got to get up and over the 66.70 to 66.75 area, at which point, if it tests that area and then pulls back and holds the 66.40, you'll be in good space to move up into the next thin volume profile event around 67.40. All right, so that's what we're looking at there. Taking a look at the YM, also a chart that did exactly the same thing. Came in, it showed resistance. This is our technical system that tells us when we've got resistance in play, when it's bearish. When it's bullish, it's going to tell us where we need to take profit if we are planning to cycle back into a trade. What it's done is come right into this old support. Again, these are the levels I had marked. The next line in the sand, really, it tested it today, right? Came down into 24,212. Our target really was 24,223. So we did fairly nicely there. Does this chart have more to run? Of course, right? This is the old resistance, new support. It's all the way down here at 23,000. My suspicion is all our bounce action, look at how thin this market auction is here. All our bounce action is very likely to fade. Oil, also tremendous reversal, really. But what did we talk about? We said, hey, listen, this chart is in a big move up. It needs to hold this region right here. It could come all the way down here, but it's very likely to bounce at the support zone, the 52.80. It faded quite deeply, so it's not like you can take it unless you want a 75-cent stop, which I don't like 75-cent stops in oil. I like them a bit lower. So that brought us all the way down into this heavy congestion, and it began to hold. How do you figure those things? You watch them bounce, and then you look for them to pull back and make higher lows, and then you do not wait. You just anticipate, take the trade based on the likely probability, upward motion, location of your SMI, upside action. You look for the higher low, and you have a fairly tight stop. It ends up being 25 cents as opposed to 75 cents overnight. Bounce action fairly likely. We don't have the EIA until Thursday. Thursday, same range-bound style formation overall into the areas. Could we get higher as we move forward? Yes, we could. My suspicion is that we dance around here for a while. If we do expand dramatically, I suspect we pull back. All right, everything I suspect is going to bounce and then fade. It's just what we are looking at in this particular environment. The only thing that might not bounce and fade is gold, because as I mentioned this morning, hey, listen, 1278, kind of a big deal. If we can get up over the 1281 area, we're going to go into 1284. It did exactly what we thought it would, but it did not go higher than this 1284.30. It's stuck as resistance. Are we likely to do it today, overnight? Yes. This is the next big congestion area, 87 to 88. Once we get there, you're going to have to decide again, this is old support. Does it become resistance, or does it turn into recovered support? A lot of buyers here that might very well be sellers. So I suspect a very choppy motion here. You want to trade these edges in the direction of the upward strength. I do not think gold is breaking down. When will I know that I'm incorrect? If it loses 1280, gets below 1277, and then does not bounce, we have got to fade into our deeper edges. Other than that, bounces lend themselves to fades, and that's how it's likely to go. Bounces could get fairly shallow. They were quite shallow today. Fades fairly deep. So I suspect a lot more sideways motion in the overnight. So watch those edges, pullbacks, buy zones, up into resistance, going to have selling action. And right now, I suspect what we'll have is another little selling action that brings us down and sort of solidifies where we set up our new elements of support in the overnight. You can see it right here. If it shoots down, listen, folks, if it loses these edges that we really are trying to hold, we're going to see more downside action. You know, trade what you see, not what you think. All right, I'll see you in the morning.